I never dreamed that the day would come. The day my own son would look at me with cold, empty eyes and say, "Dad, please, don't come here anymore." I never imagined that a son I had raised, a boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and whose victories I had celebrated, could ever push me away with such finality. But then, just 7 days later, in the fading light of a late autumn evening, that very same son was on his knees before me. His face was a mess, crumpled with a sorrow so deep it seemed to pull his features inward. Tears streamed down his cheeks, not in quiet drops, but in a torrential downpour. And his voice, when it came, was a choked, trembling whisper. "Please, Dad, please, forgive me." The moment he knelt, the world around me seemed to freeze. I felt the beat of my own heart stutter, and then stop, a block of ice forming in my chest. The air grew thin, and for a terrifying second, I thought I might collapse right there on the pavement. And when I finally learned the reason for his desperate plea, it was as if my soul was cast into a bottomless abyss, a darkness so profound I feared I would never see the light again. How could this happen? What could possibly have transpired in the space of a single week to cause such a violent swing of the emotional pendulum? How could my son go from icy rejection to shattered repentance in just 7 short days? That question alone is enough to make you clutch your chest, isn't it? It's enough to make you wonder, to demand an answer. It was as if a hurricane had torn through the quiet, predictable landscape of our lives, leaving behind a wreckage of confusion and pain. Those 7 days were a world unto themselves. During that time, the voices of the outside world, the news on the television, the chatter of neighbors over the fence, the ringing of the telephone from anyone but him, all of it faded into an insignificant hum. There was only the unspoken agony, the silent conflict raging within me, and a single, fragile thread of hope that I clung to with all my might. What I am about to share with you is the story of those 7 days. It is a story confined to the landscape of my own heart, and to the tormented space that had opened up between my son and me. There is nothing else. Just the two of us, and the storm that raged between us. I remember sitting in my worn armchair as evening settled, watching the pale yellow glow of the streetlight filter through the living room window, painting long, lonely stripes across the hardwood floor. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady myself. A heavy silence had taken up residence in the house, a tangible presence that seemed to coil in the pit of my stomach. It was a silence that had been growing for years, but now it was suffocating. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sharp electronic chime of my smartphone. My heart leaped into my throat. When I saw the name illuminated on the screen, it began to pound against my ribs like a trapped bird. Michael. With a trembling finger, I swiped to answer the call. The voice that met my ear was undeniably my son's, and yet it was not. It had a formal, detached quality, as if he were speaking through a third party, or reading from a script. It was the voice of a stranger. "Dad, is there something you need?" That simple question was a physical blow, a sharp, stabbing pain deep in my chest. All I wanted to do was say, "I just wanted to hear your voice." But the words caught in my throat. My own voice came out as a weak, reedy tremor, betraying the very vulnerability I was trying to hide. "No, not really. No reason in particular." I paused, and then, without my permission, the truth spilled out, quiet and desperate. I was hoping to see you sometime soon." Silence stretched from the other end of the line. I could hear the faint whisper of wind in the background, as if he were standing outside, turning his face away from me. Then came a sigh, heavy with an impatience that cut me to the quick. "Look, Dad, I'm really, really busy. It's honestly an inconvenience when you call out of the blue like this." In that instant, I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. The coldness, the sheer distance in his tone, was a wall I could not scale. I was speechless, unable to form a reply. After a long, painful silence, I let out a small breath, a sigh of my own, one of utter defeat. I couldn't raise my voice, I could only manage a whisper, my words shaking as I spoke them. As I ended the call, I asked myself if this was what my life had been reduced to living just to feel this kind of pain. I see, I understand. I shouldn't have bothered you. I'm sorry, son. That night, I lay in bed, curled on my side, but my eyes refused to close. My mind was a relentless reel of images, playing over and over again. My son's warm, beaming smile from 7 years ago, set against the cold, dismissive voice I had heard on the phone today. They were both Michael, my Michael, and yet they felt like two entirely different people. It was impossible to reconcile the two. Where? I whispered into the darkness of my empty bedroom. Where did I go wrong? Sometime before dawn, tears began to trace silent paths down my cheeks, soaking into the worn cotton of my pillowcase. A toxic mix of sorrow and self-blame tightened its grip around my chest, and I surrendered to the long, lonely hours of the night, a prisoner of my own grief. The next morning, when I went to get the mail, I found a plain white envelope in the box. There was no return address. My hands, still unsteady from the night before, fumbled to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence, printed in thick black block letters. Your presence is destroying everything. The words were a curse, a dagger that plunged straight into my heart. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold wave washing over my entire body. Who would send such a thing? Why was this happening? And why? Why was my own son rejecting me, too? The questions swirled in my mind, a vortex of doubt and fear that began to eat away at my sanity. The note unleashed something terrible inside me. I started to hear whispers everywhere, whispers that rang in my ears like a persistent tinnitus. Something must have happened with that old man. I hear it's his fault. His. Family is. They were invisible voices, a chorus of accusation that made me want to shrink into myself, to become so small that no one could see me. When I went to the grocery store, I clutched my shopping basket to my chest and felt the gazes of other shoppers slide away from me, avoiding my eyes. I was becoming a ghost in my own town, but even these daily tremors, these cracks appearing in the foundation of my life, were merely a prelude. They were the low, ominous notes of an overture before the real drama began. What awaited me was a trial of suffering far beyond anything I could have imagined. But it was also, in the end, a story of renewal, something so profound it felt like a miracle. What you have heard so far is just the opening act, a brief glimpse into the beginning of my ordeal. But I am sure you can already feel the heavy shadow it has cast upon your own heart. I ask you, please, to bear witness with me. I want you to see the depths of this darkness, so that you might understand the true meaning of the light that eventually followed. Please, listen to my story. This is the chronicle of those 7 days. My name is Arthur Miller, and I am 78 years old. I spent my entire working life, more than 40 years, with the railroad. I came up in an era when you could build a whole life with one company, and that's what I did. I was a track and signal maintenance man, responsible for the safety of the rails, the precision of the switches, and the integrity of the schedules. My work was to protect the lives that traveled along those steel arteries every single day. To do my job, I had to be out on the lines before the first train of the morning. That meant my day began at 4 o'clock, every morning, without fail. I'd pull on my uniform in the pre-dawn dark and step out of the house with a heavy-duty lantern in my hand. The air outside was always cool and still, the world quiet and asleep. But I was never entirely alone. At the door, my wife, Eleanor, would be waiting for me. Every single morning, she had a hot breakfast ready. It was usually a warm breakfast sandwich, wrapped in foil, and a thermos of hot coffee, strong and black, just the way I liked it. Even on the coldest winter mornings. Her simple meal was a warmth that radiated through me, a warmth that never faded. And our son, Michael, when he was just a little boy in elementary school, would always stumble out of his room, rubbing the sleep from his eyes just to see me off. He'd stand there at the door, leaning against the frame, and mumble, "Have a good day, Dad." That simple, daily ritual. I don't think I understood then how much it sustained me, how it was the very bedrock of my life. Looking back on it now, I realize what a truly fortunate man I was. Out on the tracks, my focus had to be absolute. I'd walk the lines, listening for the slightest squeak or groan in the rails, my eyes scanning for any flicker or inconsistency in the signal lights. It was a job with no room for error, a world of constant tension where a single mistake could lead to catastrophe. But with my son's sleepy farewell still echoing in my ears, I walked that path with a steady resolve, my steps firm on the gravel path heading toward the station. I remember one winter morning, years ago, during a routine inspection, I noticed an anomaly in a signal display. It was a subtle thing, a slight delay in the light change that anyone else might have missed, but it set off an alarm in my gut. I immediately radioed it in to traffic control. Because of that call, an express train that was due to pass through that section just minutes later was brought to an emergency halt. They found a hairline fracture in the switch mechanism. My report had averted a major derailment, a terrible accident. A few weeks later, the company gave me a commendation, and my supervisor pulled me aside. "They're talking about a promotion for you, Art," he told me. "A desk job, better pay, regular hours." But I quietly turned it down. "I appreciate the offer, I truly do," I said. But taking on more responsibility would mean more time away from home, more late nights. That wouldn't be good for my family. I'm happy right where I am. This is enough for me. I chose to stay out there, on the lines. Because for me, the real reward, the real honor, wasn't a bigger title or a fatter paycheck. It was coming home late at night, often bone-tired and covered in grime, and seeing the kitchen light on. It was knowing that a hot plate of food and Eleanor's smile were waiting for me. That simple, quiet happiness. That was my pride. That was my true compensation. At dinner time, the three of us would sit around our small kitchen table. I'd listen to Michael talk about his day at school, about a test he'd aced, or a problem he was having with a friend. Eleanor and I would laugh over some small, silly thing. Every part of that life, every single moment, was a pillar supporting my existence. Now, that once lively table is set for one. A single plate, a single set of silverware, sits in the vast emptiness. The only sound is the lonely, rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall. Sometimes, I pick up an old, framed photograph from the mantelpiece, the three of us, smiling on a summer vacation years ago. My eyes meet those of my younger self, and I can't help but whisper aloud to the empty room. "You did good back then," I say to the man in the picture. "You all did. You were a good family." Eleanor and I were married for over 30 years. She was so much more than a wife to me. She was my anchor, my translator, my better half. I've always been a clumsy man when it comes to emotions, unable to put my feelings into the right words. My way of speaking can be blunt, even harsh, and there were times when my gruffness created a distance between Michael and me. But Eleanor was always there to bridge that gap. She would stand beside me, smile her gentle smile, and add the words I couldn't find. "Your father doesn't mean it that way, honey," she'd say to Michael later quietly. And to me, she'd say, "I know what you're trying to say, Arthur. I understand your heart, but your words are a little too strong for him sometimes." She was the one who translated my unspoken love into a language our son could understand. She gently conveyed the affection I was too awkward to express on my own. And then, the year she got sick, the year our lives became a revolving door of hospitals and doctors, appointments, that was the year I retired from the railroad. I wanted to spend every possible moment by her side. As I sat with her day after day, watching her strength fade, I was struck with the painful, profound realization of how much I had always depended on her, how much she had saved me from myself. I remember one afternoon in her hospital room. The only sound was the quiet, rhythmic beep of the IV drip. Soft winter light filtered through the large window. It had just started to snow, and we sat there together side by side, watching the white flakes drift down, dancing in the air. The scene was so peaceful, so serene, it was as if time itself had momentarily stopped. She was propped up on her pillows, and she slowly reached a hand toward the window. She smiled, a faint but beautiful smile. "The snow is so pretty," she whispered, her voice frail. "It reminds me of the day we first met." Her hand, so thin and warm in mine, felt as though it was slowly losing its grip on the world. An unspeakable sorrow swelled in my chest, and I could only nod, unable to speak. I squeezed her hand gently. Then, in a voice barely louder than a breath, she said something that would be etched onto my heart forever. "Arthur, promise me something. After I'm gone, don't be too hard on Michael. Please? He's doing his best, in his own way. And, if you can, try not to be a burden on him. Ooh, just watch over him. Quietly." I couldn't say a word. I couldn't do anything but sit there as silent tears streamed down my face. Her words became her last will and testament to me. Her smile, the sight of the snow falling outside her window that day, the tremor in her voice. It all remains inside me, as vivid now as it was then. And my struggle to honor her final wish, her dying request, is the one thing that has kept me going, the one thing that has given me a reason to keep living in this empty house. From the day I lost her, the house fell silent. A gaping hole opened up in the center of my life, and to this day, it has never been filled. She passed away 3 years ago, after a long and painful battle. I remember her last day with a clarity that haunts me. The hushed voices of the nurses, the sterile smell of the room. "It's okay, Mr. Miller, you can rest now." I just sat there, my eyes fixed on her profile, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her breath was so faint, her lips barely moving. I just held her hand, clenching it tightly, enduring a pain that had no name and no outlet. The day after she died, I stopped my daily commute to the station. My life on the railroad was over. Now, my old house is a museum of memories. Photographs of Eleanor, old ticket stubs from our travels, drawings Michael made when he was a boy. They all sit on shelves, gathering a fine layer of dust. I never go near the tracks. I once walked for over 40 years. The station platform is a foreign country to me now. All I have left is my pension and a small savings account. And my son. I have one son, Michael. He's 42 now, a manager at a big firm in New York City. There was a time when we were a family full of life and noise. On weekends, we'd drive up into the mountains for a hike. We'd stop at a little seafood shack near the shore for lunch. At night, we'd sit on the back porch and watch the fireflies. Those quiet, happy days were real. They existed. After Michael graduated from college, his career took off. He climbed the ladder quickly, becoming a real success story at a prestigious firm in the city. He got married to a lovely woman, Sarah, and they had a child, my first and only grandchild. The day I held my grandson for the first time was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. But that joy, too, was fleeting. After Eleanor's death, the warm fabric of our family began to unravel, thread by thread. My son, my grandson, they started to feel impossibly far away, like figures on a distant shore. Some nights, the wind would howl around the corners of the old house, and the sound would wake me. I'd think to myself, I should call him. I'll just call and see how he is. But even when I managed to dial the number with my shaky fingers, the conversations were stilted and hollow. "How are you, son?" I'd ask. "Fine, Dad. Everything's fine." "It's getting colder now, make sure you're dressing warm," I'd want to say, but the words would get stuck, a lump of unspoken affection in my throat. I felt pathetic, unable to even connect with my own child. Then would come the inevitable, gentle dismissal. "Listen, Dad, I'm good, but work is really crazy right now. I'll call you back when I get a chance." Each time he said it, the words landed like a lead weight in my gut, amplifying the profound loneliness that had become my constant companion. A wave of grief would wash over me, and the pride I once felt in my work, the easy comfort of my conversations with Eleanor, it all felt like a distant dream. A terrible thought began to take root in my mind. Perhaps I was no longer a real member of my own family. Perhaps I was just an obligation. One day, with my grandson's birthday approaching, I decided I would go into the city. I would make the trip. I bought a train ticket and stood on the station platform, a place that was once as familiar to me as my own home. I looked down at the tracks. The same steel rails I had once protected with my own 2 hands, stretching out before me, seeming to mock me in their indifference. As I stood there, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. There was a warmth, a nostalgia for the life I once had. But it was quickly swamped by a deep, suffocating anxiety. Do I even have the right to get on this train? Will they even be happy to see me? Maybe I'm not welcome anymore. My legs began to tremble. My breath grew ragged. I shouldn't go today, a voice in my head insisted. It's not the right time. And so I just stood there, frozen on the platform, staring at the tracks until my train came and went without me. In that moment, I understood. I was just an old man. I had nothing left to offer, no one who depended on me. I was just a solitary figure, living amidst the wreckage of a past life. Eventually, I turned away from the platform and slipped the unused ticket back into my coat pocket. My wife, my son, my grandson, none of them were by my side. And I realized for the first time that the loneliness and isolation I felt wasn't just because of my son's coldness. It was because I, myself, had begun to feel useless. Somehow, without even noticing it, I had started to believe the very thing my wife had feared. I had come to see myself as a burden, and with that, he bowed his head slightly and whispered, his voice so quiet it was almost lost to the air. Please, let this reach him, please. Carry my feelings to my boy. The sound of the envelope clattering deep inside. The mailbox seemed to echo from a great distance. On the walk home, I looked up at the sky again and again. A pale sun was trying to break through the gaps in the clouds, and its weak light seemed to be telling me, it's going to be all right. That sound, the clatter of the envelope, left me with a feeling that the last of my hope had been cast into the void. No, maybe that was just what I wanted to believe. But deep in my heart, a persistent anxiety remained, a shadow I couldn't shake. When he reads this letter, what will he think? A silent prayer, offered there in front of the cold metal box. How that prayer would lead to the events of that day, 7 days later at the time, I had no way of knowing. Was this the right thing to do? Shouldn't I have at least called first? The voice of self-recrimination echoed relentlessly in my mind. But even after sending it, an unforeseen unease refused to leave me. In the days after I mailed that letter, checking the mailbox each morning became a solemn ritual. But no matter how long I waited, it held nothing but junk mail and bills. No reply ever came, and with each passing day, the shadow of anxiety inside me grew a little darker, a little colder. Still, I kept telling myself, he must be busy, and decided to try calling again. On another day, the phone rang and rang, but no one answered. It didn't even switch over to an answering machine, it just cut off with a sterile silence. But no matter how many times I tried, all I heard was the automated message. The number you have dialed is currently busy. Aye! That's odd. I tilted my head, trying to dismiss it. It must just be a coincidence. But a small, sharp thorn of worry had lodged itself in my heart, and it wouldn't go away. One afternoon, on my way home from the local market, I ran into a neighbor, a kind woman I'd known for years. The first words out of her mouth were laced with concern. Arthur, I've been seeing your son, Michael. He seems to be coming home very late every night. And his face, he looks so worn out. We've been a little worried about him here in the neighborhood, wondering if he's all right. Is that so? I suppose he's just busy with work, I said. But deep inside, my heart was in turmoil. For a moment, I was at a loss for words, able to do nothing more than offer a vague, non-committal smile. But I didn't know what it was. All I knew was that something was happening in my son's life, and that a nameless dread was slowly closing in on me. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Something was definitely wrong. Finally, just after 10 o'clock, I gathered my courage and dialed his number one more time. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then, just as the call connected, soap, no. I heard the sound of a small child crying. It was followed by what sounded like someone shouting. And then, immediately, an abrupt click a sterile, mechanical sound as the call was disconnected. I sat there, frozen, still clutching the phone in my hand. A chill ran through my entire body, and a cold sweat slicked my palms. Was that, was that my grandson's voice? I couldn't even process the question. I could only feel a dark shadow spreading through my chest, growing larger and larger. And at last, I had to give a name to the fear that was welling up inside me. Something is happening. I began to fear, in some corner of my heart, that this small sense of unease was about to become a tidal wave, crashing down upon me. This conviction was something I could no longer dismiss with words like, "It's just my imagination," or "it's a coincidence." But at that moment, I still had no idea of the true scale of what was to come. I would learn the true nature of those 7 days, only a few days later. This was how it began. The dawn of those 7 days. The beginning of a quiet catastrophe, and the premonition of it was a feeling I, fetch in cells of fog, begging. It was becoming harder and harder for me to endure the loneliness. The letter had been ignored, the phone calls went unanswered, and my isolation deepened with each passing day. I couldn't forget that my grandson's birthday was approaching, and so, finally, I made up my mind. All right, I'm going. As my grandson's birthday drew closer, I asked myself the same question over and over again. What can I bring him? What would make him happy? And so, I pulled a box from the back of my desk drawer, a set of imported colored pencils I had bought some time ago. It had been purchased with a small portion of my pension savings, but those pencils, with their brilliant, varied colors, seemed to me like rays of hope. He loves to draw, these will be perfect for him. Then, my gaze fell upon a picture hanging on the living room wall. It was a drawing my grandson had sent me last Christmas, a crayon portrait of his family, and in it, there was a small, smiling face that was supposed to be me. This picture, it's a precious treasure. I carefully took the drawing down from the wall, dusted it off, and placed it inside a simple wooden picture frame. The gentle grain of the wood felt warm and familiar in my hands. As I ran my fingers over it, I whispered to myself, I wonder how much he's grown. I wonder if he still remembers his grandpa. With trembling fingers, I took out a roll of wrapping paper and began to wrap the gifts with great care. I paid close attention to where I placed the tape, and I made sure the ribbon was tied perfectly straight. It felt as if this gift was a physical representation of all my feelings. As I sealed the final fold, I made a wish in my heart. Please, let this little box bring a smile to his face. I put on my old black overcoat, carefully tucking a copy of the letter I had sent into the breast pocket. Mindful not to swing my bag too wildly against my old body, I stepped out of the house. On the way to the station, I looked up at the persimmon tree and saw a few last pieces of fruit clinging to the bare branches. My vision blurred with tears, but even so, I did not stop walking. On a clear October morning, I forced my heavy legs to move, one step at a time. After a train ride and a transfer, I arrived at a bustling station in the heart of the city. The crowds on the platform pushed and pulled at me, and I felt as though I might be swallowed by the sea of people. But a small flame of hope flickered in my chest. When I arrived in New York, I climbed the long flight of stairs slowly, taking deep breaths to try and calm my pounding heart. I'm going to see him. I'm going to see my grandson. That single thought was all that kept my tired legs moving. The walk from the station was just as I remembered it. The sounds of the city, the voices of people, and the rumble of cars flowed around me like a river. At last, I stood in front of my son's apartment building. I opened the heavy glass door of the lobby, walked down the hall, and stared at the door to his unit. The small paper bag in my hand felt heavy, my heart filled with a tense mixture of anxiety and anticipation. It was then that I heard it. From inside, a burst of lively, joyful laughter. The cheerful sounds of a family meal, a child's happy squeals, the low murmur of adult conversation. Oh, oh, oh. Right, it's his birthday today. I whispered the words to myself and stood there for a long time, frozen in place. I strained my ears and heard a song playing, Perhaps they were about to blow out the candles on the cake. I heard someone shout, "Happy birthday!" followed by a round of applause, and then more laughter. There was no doubt about it. A family moment was happening in there. Without thinking, I reached out my hand and placed a finger on the intercom button next to the door. But my finger stopped in midair. What am I doing? I asked myself the question and let out a small, quiet laugh. The corner of my mouth turned up slightly, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was something closer to sorrow. Their family, of course they should be here, I muttered the words. But deep down, I felt like an outsider, an intruder. My hand tightened around the paper bag. Inside were the colored pencils and the framed drawing. I took another deep breath, and this time, I stepped right up to the door and raised my hand to knock. I had no way of knowing that what awaited me on the other side was something so completely different from what I had imagined. "Dad?" The voice that emerged from the doorway, which opened into the dim hallway, was unmistakably my son's. But when I looked up at his face, I saw a strained, frightened expression, his eyes holding a mixture of apprehension and a cold, distant light. Confused, I managed to say, "I'm sorry to bother you." Just then, another voice shot out from inside the apartment. "I thought we agreed you weren't going to let him in." The voice was sharp, filled with undisguised annoyance and irritation. My heart froze in my chest, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone, it must have been Sarah, leaned out from behind the door and glared down at me. "If you wanted to see your father, you should have called beforehand. To just show up unannounced like this, as an adult, it's just common sense." I had no words to offer in reply. All I had wanted was to celebrate my grandson's birthday with them. That was all. But as if to reject even that simple wish, my son finally spoke. "Please don't come here anymore. I don't want you causing any more trouble for my wife and my son." His cold words landed on my chest with the weight of a physical blow. I stood there, speechless, unable to move. In the corner of my eye, I caught a fleeting glimpse of my grandson's small form. The boy flinched, and he wouldn't look at me. In that instant, I understood with painful clarity that I was nothing more than a burden to them. I said nothing. I simply turned my face away, slowly. I lowered my gaze, pressed my lips together, and took a deep breath. Deep in my chest, a lifetime of love, regret, and loneliness threatened to spill out all at once. "I understand. I'm sorry to have disturbed you." I said the words in a trembling voice, and then, with my own 2 feet, I began to walk away from the door, one slow step at a time. A heavy, suffocating atmosphere seemed to press against my back, as if I wasn't even allowed to look back. Just as the door was closing, in the tiny gap that remained, a small shadow peeked out. It was my grandson. His eyes were wide, and his mouth opened as if he wanted to say something. But in that same moment, a hand reached out from behind him, gently pulled him back by the shoulder, and he disappeared behind the door. For just a fraction of a second, his eyes met mine. Oh! Standing there in the hallway, I could no longer hear any voices. The only thing that remained was that single, searing image burned into my memory. That momentary gaze. His eyes. They were exactly the same as the innocent eyes of a young Michael, when he used to look at me all those years ago. A look of surprise, of fear, and, somewhere in there, a helpless expression that seemed to be asking, "Why?" I pressed a hand to my chest and whispered in my heart, "I'm so sorry. All I wanted was to see you smile one more time." And then, I heard her voice, whispering in my ear. I remembered her in the hospital room, looking out the window at the snow, smiling as she said it. "Even after I'm gone, Arthur, you have to protect your bond with our child. You promise me, now." I closed my eyes. I had nodded then. I had promised. How did it ever come to this? I couldn't blame anyone, and I couldn't blame myself. All I felt was the sensation of falling into a deep, dark hole, a feeling that quietly took over my heart. The walk back to the station, I don't know how long it took. My steps were heavy, and it felt as though every joint in my body ached. I kept my head down, my eyes on the pavement, trying not to dissolve into the sea of people around me. A dull, persistent pain, like the grinding of broken glass, echoed in my chest. All I could see in my mind was the small of my grandson's back, the memory of my wife's smile, and the loneliness and regret that I carried with me. Perhaps I really wasn't a member of the family anymore. The thought sent a shiver across my skin. Why? Why did he have to say that? Once I was on the train home, I sank into a window seat. On my lap sat the still unopened paper bag. The ribbon was still tied, and the wrapping paper bore the faint impression of my own anxious hands. The train car was filled with the sounds of life, the laughter of a family, the chatter of a young couple, the sound of a child singing. Everyone was with someone, everyone looked safe and secure next to someone else. And in the midst of that scene, I was utterly alone. It's as if I'm on the outside of this world, looking in, I murmured to myself as I stared out the window. The autumn sun slanted through the glass, painting the passing towns in shades of gold, but none of its beauty could reach my heart. After a few stops, the train slowed to a gentle glide as it pulled into a station. The platform, the signal tower at the end, the fence below the tracks. It was all exactly as I remembered it, as if time had stood still here. This was it, the station where I had worked for 40 years. Back then, I would leave the house at 4 o'clock every morning, come to this station, and ensure the safety of the trains. I could suddenly see it all so clearly, my wife, Eleanor, calling out, "Have a good day," as I left, and a little Michael waving to me from the porch. Those days when I never missed a single shift, not for snow, not for storms. We were a real family back then, weren't we? The feeling swelled in my chest, a sentiment that had no words. I was afraid that if I tried to speak, I would fall apart completely, so I just closed my eyes. Without warning, a single tear traced a path down my cheek. I hugged the paper bag on my lap with both hands. When I arrived at my home station, I sat down on a platform bench and, for a long time, I couldn't move. The noise of the crowds and the trains seemed to fade into the distance. I was aware only of the turbulent waves inside me. The night wind blew past, rustling the cuffs of my sweater. That night, standing in front of another man's door, I felt the crushing weight of the title of father. And from that moment on, I could no longer think of a place where I was supposed to return. The only thing I knew for certain was that the hole that had been carved into my heart was far too deep and far too wide. This was the first peak of that terrible week. The moment my heart was shattered into 1,000 pieces, the sound of the closing door faded, and before I knew it, I was sitting on the porch of my own house, wrapped in the darkness of the night. The paper bag was still on my lap. The colored pencils on my grandson's drawing had not been given to anyone. They remained clutched in my arms. On the third night after that day, I was trembling with loneliness again. I was in the kitchen making tea when my smartphone on the counter lit up with a faint glow. I looked at the screen and saw I had a new text message from an unknown number. "If you don't want to lose everything, you'd better be ready." That was all it said. Who would send this? Why? My heart began to pound, and I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. What in the world? At first, I thought the text message that appeared on my phone had to be some kind of prank. If you don't want to lose everything, be prepared. That was the entire message. But the phrase, "lose everything," felt like a cold blade twisting deep in my gut. I looked at the screen again and again, checking to see if the words were still there, if I had misread them. But no matter how many times I looked, the same words remained. My fingertips began to tremble. My breathing grew shallow, and I felt as if the floor were tilting beneath my feet. Could this be something to do with Michael? The moment the thought crossed my mind, my heart gave a violent lurch, and a cold sweat ran down my back. I stood up and went to the small den where I kept a photo of my late wife. Her image smiled at me, serene and silent. If this is some kind of curse, please, let it fall on me alone, please. Don't let them touch my boy, please. Not him. I lit a stick of incense and put my hands together, my voice a small, desperate whisper. I didn't sleep at all that night. Outside, a cold wind rattled the branches of the trees. Inside the house, The only sound was the steady ticking of the clock. My wife's smile said nothing. It was just there, silent. The short sentence on the screen was like a curse, repeating itself over and over in my head. I remembered my son mentioning that he was in a tight spot with some money issues, but I had never learned any of the details. I sat on my bed, hugging my knees, my body stiff with fear as I replayed the events of the last few days. I'd heard something about a debt, but I never knew the reason or the amount. The next morning, I made a decision. I had to go to the police. But just as I was about to leave, my phone rang. It was an out-of-state number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a low male voice said a single sentence. "Your son collapsed at a train station in New York City." The blood drained from my body. I couldn't speak. Which station is it?" I asked in a trembling voice, but the line went dead. The next thing I knew, I was frantically throwing on clothes, then getting in my car and speeding toward the nearest police station. A cold, damp rain was falling, and the sound of it hitting the windshield seemed to hammer against my eardrums. When I arrived at the police station, I was led into an interview room. A police officer looked at me with a grave expression. "A short while ago," he said, "we found a man who had collapsed on a platform near Grand Central Terminal. The only things he had on him were his ID and a slip of paper with his father's oxide contact information. Paramedics were able to revive him, but he's been transported to the hospital." The words hit me like a physical force, a shockwave that started deep in my bones. My heart seized, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. "My son," I whispered, my voice shaking. The officer nodded and took out a small piece of paper. This was the only contact information we found in his possession. We were hoping you could cooperate with our investigation. In that moment, I couldn't stop myself from breaking down. I collapsed forward, my head hitting the table with a thud. The terror of realizing that I was someone's last resort, and the profound regret that came with it, tore my heart to pieces. I was half running down the hospital corridor. Ever since the call from the police, my sense of time had vanished. I had just driven here on pure, desperate instinct. A nurse showed me to a room and opened the door. There, lying quietly on the bed, was Michael. His face was pale, and several IV tubes were connected to his arms. A heart monitor beeped out a steady, monotonous rhythm. My legs were trembling so badly I couldn't move. I just stood there in the doorway. "Michael?" The word that escaped my lips was so small, so shaky, I could barely hear it myself. I took one slow step, and then another, until I was standing beside the bed. Beneath my mask, tears were streaming down my face. "It's okay, you're going to be okay," I repeated the words over and over, my own hand trembling as I gently took Michael's. This was the same hand that had once been so small, the hand that had gripped my finger as he laughed and said, "Daddy, piggyback ride." Now, that hand was cold and limp, lost in silence. "It's your dad. I'm here. You're not alone anymore." I held his hand tightly and, as if in prayer, I called his name again and again. In the conversation that followed, I came to understand why I had been called. The threatening text message, the shadow of debt, and my phone number clutched in his hand as he lay unconscious. All of it pointed to a situation that was far more serious than I could have imagined. I thought to myself, I don't know what I can do from here, but no matter how deep the pit of despair, I had to continue being a father. I had to. It occurred to me then. The last time he came back home to the country was about a year ago, in the early fall. "There's something I need to talk to you about." For the first time in a long while, Michael said he wanted to speak with me alone, and we sat down together on the edge of the porch. His expression was unsettled, and he seemed to be searching for the right words. Eventually, he looked me straight in the eye. "Dad, could I borrow $20,000? I'm starting a small company." I didn't ask for any details. I just said, "All right." I went to the bank and withdrew the money from the savings account I had set aside for my retirement. The next morning, I gave him the full amount. "Do your best, son. Your mother would be proud." I smiled as I said it, and then I watched him go. I thought I was looking at a small seed of hope. But after that day, Michael cut off all contact. He wouldn't answer my calls. He didn't come home for the holidays. It was as if he was actively avoiding me, I wondered. Did that money become a burden for him? Perhaps what I had given him wasn't money, but expectation. And perhaps that was why he wanted to turn away from the weight of it. But a parent is a strange creature. Even when you feel betrayed, you can never truly bring yourself to hate your own child. Just then, a doctor approached with quiet steps. With every rustle of his white coat, my heart beat faster. He spoke in a low voice. "Sir, are there any other family members?" I shook my head. "I'm sorry, it's just me." The doctor's expression was serious as he began to explain. "Mr. Miller, your son, is suffering from severe psychological shock. The truth is, he's carrying an enormous amount of debt, and it's because he was the victim of an investment scam perpetrated by one of his own colleagues at work. It appears he dipped into company funds to cover the losses, and when the investment collapsed, the company's money vanished along with his own. He is now the subject of a criminal investigation. The pressure became too much for him, and it seems he simply collapsed under the weight of it all." The doctor's words struck me like a physical blow to the chest, but the thought of my son, suffering so terribly, unable to confide in anyone, just sinking deeper and deeper into that darkness alone, it was enough to tear my heart in two. A wave of self-blame washed over me. If only I hadn't lent him that money back then, the doctor continued in his grave, quiet tone. However, for matters like bail and restitution, his family's cooperation is absolutely essential. If you can secure a bail bond and find someone to co-sign, there's a possibility he could be released pending trial. We need to know, sir, are you willing to provide that support for your son? I took a long, slow, deep breath. I felt myself summoning strength from the very tips of my toes to the top of my head, every muscle in my body tensing. "I understand," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'll be the one. I'll co-sign for him, and I will get together every last dollar I possibly can." The doctor simply nodded and handed me a pen and a stack of documents. Furthermore, I presented the appraisal certificate for the only property I owned, my small house in the country, and committed to taking the necessary steps to use it as collateral. With a hand that shook uncontrollably, I signed my name, filling in the line designated for the co-signer. "Dad, you didn't have to. You didn't have to do all this." Just then, I felt a faint movement. Michael's fingers twitched, as if he were trying to reach out and take my hand. I answered him softly, my voice low and sure. "It's all right, son. This is my job. This is what a father does." I stood before the bail papers the doctor had given me, my hands trembling in small, barely perceptible spasms. The blank spaces seemed to stare up at me, demanding my name, my address, my phone number, and finally, my signature as the responsible party. The moment I picked up the pen, the strength seemed to drain from my fingertips. The ink bled slightly into the paper, making the letters of my signature look distorted and shaky. I saw the doctor cast his eyes downward for a moment, a quiet acknowledgement of my distress, but I pretended not to notice. I slowly set the pen down. For 40 years, I said, my voice quiet but clear. I signed safety protocols for the railroad. I held the responsibility for protecting the lives of hundreds, even thousands, of people. I raised my head and looked the doctor straight in the eye. But I have never signed anything that squeezed my heart like this. This is the first time. As the words left my lips, I felt a cold draft run down my spine, as if a window had been opened into my soul. This document was more than just a bail agreement. It was a lien against my home, the only home I had, the place I had expected to spend the rest of my days. That porch, the familiar feel of the floorboards under my feet, the night sky I had looked up at with Eleanor, but I would carry the weight of it all to save my son. With that resolve solidifying in my heart, I picked up the pen once more. This time, my hand was steady, the pressure of the pen firm as I wrote my name in the final signature block, Arthur Miller. As I looked down at those two words, I spoke silently to my wife in my heart. And when I gently handed the papers to the doctor, something inside me finally broke. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. You'd understand, wouldn't you, my love? I know you would. That evening, clutching the thick bundle of legal documents, I made my way to a lawyer's office. The air outside was cold, and I felt as though I was wrapped in the scent of morning, but my heart held only one desperate wish. When I returned home, I sat in the cold, dark den and spoke quietly to the framed photograph of my wife on the mantelpiece. Just as you said, I'm letting go of this house. But if it means our boy gets to live, with my mind made up, I contacted a real estate agent the next morning and asked for an appraisal of my little house in the country. The process moved with surprising speed, and within a few days, the sale was finalized. With the money I received, I was able to post Michael's bail and pay off a portion of his debts. And so, a few weeks later, Michael was temporarily released from the center of the storm and came home to me. He looked utterly exhausted. The shadows under his eyes were dark and deep, and his shoulders were slumped, as if all the strength had been drained from his body. In the profound silence, where only the ticking of the clock could be heard, the hospital room door opened without a sound. A doctor in a white coat approached me slowly. Just before dawn that day, I had been huddled in a small chair in a corner of the waiting room, praying in silence. Mr. Miller, your son is past the worst of it. He's going to be okay. The moment those words reached my ears, I shot up from my chair and bowed my head deeply. Thank you, truly, thank you so much. My vision blurred with tears, and the inside of my mask grew hot and wet. I remained bowed for a long moment, whispering under my breath, "Oh God, Eleanor, thank you. Thank you for letting me be a father one more time." With a trembling hand, I pressed my chest and slowly raised my head. The light I saw before me was hazy through my tears, but it was undeniably warm. Michael was alive. Just that. That alone was enough. In that moment, I knew from the bottom of my soul that everything I had given up had been worth it. One evening in his hospital room, he finally opened his eyes, and the first thing they focused on was me. "Dad?" His voice was thin, a mere thread of sound, but it was my name. In that instant, I fell to my knees beside his bed. Beneath my tear-soaked mask, a choked sob escaped my throat. "Michael, you came back. I'm so glad you came back. Dad's here. I'm right here." The house was no longer just mine for the future. Of the father and son who remained, a new day was about to dawn. That night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was wrapped in a warm blanket. The air in the hospital room seemed to have grown a little warmer, a little softer. Mixed in with the quiet beeping of the IV drip, I heard a small voice. "Dad, I'm so sorry." It was Michael, his voice raspy and low. I was startled and turned to look at him, really look at him. The man lying before me was no longer a man, he was a child again, looking at me with wide, shimmering eyes. I was tricked by my colleague. I even used the company's money, it's all. My fault? All of it. A sharp pain seized my chest, and something thick and heavy lodged itself in my throat, making it impossible to speak. Even after hearing his words, I couldn't find a single thing to say. I just looked at him, into his eyes. They were filled with an honest, unvarnished regret, and the deep anguish of a man who hated himself. After a few seconds of silence, I gently took his hand in mine and slowly began to speak. "I'm an old man now, but if you're really ready to start over, then your father will stand right beside you, even if I have to lean on a cane to do it." The moment I said it, tears began to spill from Michael's eyes, rolling down his temples into his pillow, and I felt that those tears were more precious than anything in the world. Forgiveness isn't something you give with words. It's born in the very moment that two hearts truly touch. That is what I felt in that room. With the house already sold to pay off the debts, I had no place to live. I had no choice but to begin the process of moving into an assisted living facility. A few weeks after Michael was discharged from the hospital, I made a difficult but necessary decision. Yes, from now on, my life would be spent in a retirement home. The house where I met my wife, raised my son, and shared so many smiles and tears. All of those memories were etched into the old wooden pillars, the faded window screens, the creak of the floorboards. I had lived in that house for nearly 45 years. The day I was to sign the contract with the real estate agent, I sat at a desk in his office, facing a mountain of paperwork, and took a deep breath. And then, one by one, I began to fill in the blanks with my name in small, neat letters. When I reached the signature line, I paused, setting down the pen. I picked up the document and looked around the room, though I saw nothing. On the wall of my memory, I could still see the faint trace of a crayon scribble my son had made when he was 6 years old. With a trembling fingertip, I reached out and gently traced the ghost of that mark in the air. I never scolded you for drawing on the walls back then, did I? A warm ache spread through my chest. Just then, the real estate agent asked me softly, "Are you absolutely sure about this, sir?" For a moment, I was speechless. The words caught in my throat. I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, in a slow, quiet voice, I replied, "There is no other choice. This is the last thing I can do for my son." Those words echoed in my own heart, and for the first time, I truly understood the meaning of resolve. After signing the contract, I asked to be taken straight back to the house, and I saw the agent off. When I opened the front door, the silence inside the house was deafening, but in that silence, I could hear the echoes of laughter I had once shared with my wife. I took out a cloth and began to carefully wipe down the floors, the window panes, and the glass of the porch door. Even as I packed my belongings, I did so with care, placing each memento gently into its box. On the kitchen table, as if it were an afterthought, I left a single sheet of paper. This house was filled with so much laughter. May the next family who lives here also find many happy days. That was all I wrote, quietly, but with a conviction that came from the depths of my heart. As evening fell, I took an old broom and swept the front steps one last time, then gave a final, formal bow to the empty house. I wiped down the numbers on the mailbox, gave the trunk of the old oak tree that had watched over us for so long a gentle pat, and I said goodbye. On the way to the station, the house grew smaller and smaller behind me. Tears I could no longer suppress welled up and streamed down my cheeks. From the train window, the house seemed to dissolve into the setting sun, and I knew, with a quiet certainty, that I would never be back. In that moment, I heard my wife's voice in the back of my mind. "If the day ever comes that you have to leave this house, please, just keep the memories in your heart. Let's leave the sadness behind, okay?" The voice that came to me felt like a gentle hand on my back, pushing me forward. I nodded deeply and wiped the tears from my face. Letting go of a house doesn't mean you lose the memories. It means you are sealing them away, safely, deep inside your heart. The morning I was to move into the facility, I left the house with a small bundle of my daily necessities and the framed photo of my wife, all resting on a folded-up old newspaper. It was in that moment that I finally felt ready to accept what was happening. The porch where our family used to gather, the flower beds in the yard, the station platform at dusk. I was saying goodbye to all of it. My room at the home was simple and clean. With white walls and a curtain covering a single window, there was just a bed and a small closet. This was where my new life would begin. I managed to squeeze my few belongings into the cramped space. "So, this is it, my final home." I whispered the words, and my chest tightened. But there was no other option. Everything I had done was to save my son, and that thought was what kept me going. The staff at the home were kind, and they explained the necessary procedures in a calm, professional manner. I thanked them politely, said, "I look forward to being in your care," and silently signed the forms they gave me. My handwriting on those documents was much smaller than it had been on the public records I used to sign, but it was filled with a quiet, unshakable resolve. A week after I moved in, something unexpected happened. Every single afternoon, my son started visiting me at the facility to help take care of me. At first, he would just come and sit by my bed, gently take my hand and ask, "Dad, are you tired?" But as the days went on, his visits became more involved. He would bring nail clippers, clean towels, and simple meals he had prepared himself. He learned how to make the chicken noodle soup I had always loved, and he brought me small side dishes he had taught himself to cook at home. "You don't have to hold back with me anymore, Dad," he would say, his voice gentle. I was aware of my own growing frailty, the weakness in my hands and legs, but to see my son there, supporting me so diligently, made me feel as though he was treating me not just as a father, but as a person, someone important to him. I was surprised and a little flustered, but I could only nod silently in response. One day, after we had finished lunch, my son said, "Dad, I have some time today. Let's go up to the rooftop garden together." To be honest, after so long without even going outside, I felt a little hesitant. "No, that's quite all right," I replied. But my son immediately offered me his arm. The small garden on the roof had a few benches and some planters, and in the springtime, I was told, miniature tulips would bloom there. My son and I walked slowly through the space. "The air is nice and clean up here, isn't it, Dad?" he said. He didn't try to smooth over the past or make excuses. He just walked beside me, his presence a quiet comfort. One evening, I asked him, "Michael, why do you come here every day?" My son hesitated for a moment, then let out a long breath before he answered. "Because you lost your home, Dad. You lost your place because of me. But I made a promise to myself. I decided that I am never, ever going to let you be alone again." When I heard those words, a warmth spread through my chest, and I had to turn my head to wipe away the tears that I couldn't put into words. Life at the home settled into a slow, gentle rhythm. Michael would listen patiently as I told him stories, sometimes reminiscing together about our family's past, about Eleanor, about my days working at the station, about his own childhood adventures. He would take out a small notepad and jot things down, listening intently to every word. Even the staff members would smile when they saw my son tearing up as he listened to me speak. "You two have such a wonderful relationship," one of them said to me, and I just nodded quietly. The days when I had felt like I might be a burden to my family now seemed like a distant dream. My son was not a burden. I was, at least for now, needed by someone. And that feeling was everything. But this new life was by no means free of worry. The debt was still there. And there were ongoing meetings with the lawyer and paperwork to be filed with the court. My son, while juggling his job, acted as my representative, handling most of the procedures himself. One day, the lawyer called. "We have the final estimate for the debt settlement. Any further reduction would be nearly impossible under the system. But thanks to the efforts of you and your son, we've reached a fairly manageable agreement." As I listened to the report, I happened to look out the window of my room at the setting sun. The sky was awash in gold, and it felt as though that light was seeping into my long years of regret and exhaustion. My son squeezed my hand. "It's going to be okay, Dad. From here on out, I'll take care of everything." I held on to those words and managed a shaky smile. A few months later, the debt was legally settled, and my son was able to return to his job at the company. The story of my son's visits became well known among the other residents and staff at the home. I felt a little embarrassed by the attention, but I made a silent vow to myself. As long as my son is here to support me, I will be stronger. I continued my life at the home, and my life found a new rhythm, which included a weekly trip to the hospital for a checkup. One night, I was by the small window in my room, getting ready for sleep. Outside, a gentle autumn rain was falling, and the only sound in the room was the soft tapping of the raindrops against the glass. As I listened, each tap seemed to gently nudge open a door to the past, each sound resonating deep in my chest. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, if it hadn't been for that time, for that nameless, terrible fall, Michael might never have come back to me, would he? The rain seemed to answer my words, its sound both soft and cold. It was then that I realized it for the first time. This final chapter of my long life felt, in a strange way, like a new beginning. The faint sound of the rain was an echo of apology and a glimmer of hope. both falling softly upon my heart. Perhaps now, in this small pocket of time I had left, a time I could spend in peace and quiet, I no longer needed to carry anything. It was true that, in the eyes of the world, I had lost my property, lost my home, and was now just an old man facing his own mortality. But even so, the moment I had that thought, I felt my chest grow a little lighter, a little warmer. In each drop of rain, it seemed that my past regrets and my future salvation were falling in the same rhythm. Thank you for leaving me this time, for leaving this time for your father. I took a deep breath and gently settled back into my bed. And just like that, wrapped in the sound of the rain, I drifted into a quiet, peaceful sleep. One afternoon, a lead-colored sky hung outside my window. A cold, lingering winter wind made the curtains stir, but the room itself was filled with a certain warmth. This was the first weekend that my son and I had spent entirely by ourselves. We took a walk together to a small shopping arcade near the facility and bought 2 hot pretzels from a vendor. The sweet, yeasty aroma tickled my nose, and my chest tightened with a feeling of nostalgia. We used to eat these as a family of 3, didn't we? I murmured the words with a small smile. My son, walking beside me, said hesitantly, "Here, Dad, let's share this one." I reached out and took the pretzel from him. It was hot in my hands, and when I broke it in half, the soft, warm dough inside sent a wave of warmth up to my face. "Dad, if you hadn't come for me that day, I don't think I would be here right now." In the middle of our quiet walk, my son's voice was soft, carrying the unvarnished truth of his feelings. Every word soaked into my heart, and I had to look up at him to keep the tears from spilling over. "Michael, that was always my dream, you know. To see my grandson smile on his birthday, that was the only thing I ever wanted. So, thank you. Thank you for coming back." My son nodded slowly and took my hand, squeezing it tightly. His hand, thin and trembling in mine, reminded me of the warmth of his small hand when he was just a boy, and my heart ached with a fierce, protective love. "I'm not leaving you again, Dad. If you weren't here, I—" His words trailed off. But in that silence, there was a depth of meaning that no words could ever capture. Fighting back tears again, I answered him. "It's okay, Dad's here. I'll always be here." We sat down on a bench outside the shop, and as we ate our pretzels, we simply confirmed each other's presence in the quiet of the afternoon. The winter sun was low in the sky, stretching our 2 shadows long across the pavement. My broken heart was still a long way from being healed, but it was now filled with the hope of living again, with someone I love. From that day on, I felt for the first time that I had gotten my real family back. We would have lunch together in the facility's dining hall. My son would help prune the trees in the garden, and sometimes we would fold small origami figures while he told me stories about his son, my grandson. Our days were woven together from these small, simple but undeniable moments of connection. One day, as if I had just remembered something, I said, "You know, Michael, that crayon scribble you made on the wall when you were a boy, a faint trace of it is still there. I used to look at it and think, my dad noticed. He was really watching me." My son's eyes crinkled as he smiled, and he gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "I remember. But I'm glad you noticed it before they repainted the walls." Our eyes met, and without another word, we both understood the feeling in each other's hearts. And then, one day, as winter was drawing to a close, I thought to myself, this may be the final shape of my life. And yet, this story of love and rebirth made me feel, I'm glad I'm still alive. That fact alone was enough to transform all the suffering, all the pain I had ever experienced, into something meaningful. Even if I had nothing in my hands, even if I had lost so much, I still had my family. Family isn't about a shape or a place. It's about the connection you have in your hearts. The moment I truly believed that, a deep, quiet happiness and a calm resolve for the future began to bloom in my chest. And I turned to my son one more time to put it into words. "Michael, thank you. Your father. I'm going to be right here, supporting you for whatever time I have left." My son nodded silently, his eyes meeting mine. And so, our story comes to a quiet close. Many things were lost, but what was found in their place was deep regret, despair, and finally, the strength to stand up again. I have carved all of it into my heart, and I am ready to take another step forward. Sometimes, it is only by losing our family that we realize its true value. I wanted to leave this story here as a testament to that truth. This is the story of our renewal, the story of a father, a son, and a small but steady flame of rebirth that will be passed down to the grandson. Thank you for listening. Without realizing it, we sometimes hurt the people who are most important to us. In your own life, have you ever found yourself brushing off the words of your parents using busyness or the pressures of the world as an excuse? Especially when it comes to our parents, the pain we cause can be deep, and it can last for a very long time. If one day you were to lose everything, what would you truly need? Would it be money? Or would it be the presence of someone who would gently take your hand? If this story has touched your heart in any way, please take a moment to share your feelings in the comments below. Your single comment might become a spark of hope for someone else who is struggling with the same pain. And, if you would, please consider leaving a like and following our channel. There are many more stories waiting here. Stories that will speak to your heart. Thank you so much for listening to the very end.